Welcome to the Pint Glass Football Podcast.
What's up, PGF Nation? Seahawks win Super Bowl 60 with a dominant effort from the defense. Alex and I are going to recap the game, give you our thoughts. Plus, we have picks 13 through 32 of my NFL Mock Draft 1.0 that we're going to go over. If you guys haven't already, go back a couple episodes. We did picks 1 through 12 of the mock draft already. So if you haven't caught that, go check that out. Going to do the second half of the mock here after we talk about the Super Bowl, Alex. Once again, guys, I'm your host, Brad Fowler. Joining me is my co-host, Alex Higdon. Alex, what's going on?
Hey, man, what's up? We had a I guess I don't want to say electrifying Super Bowl, but we had a Super Bowl. I know it's exciting for those of us who love, football, but some people want to talk about the halftime show or whatever happened in the beginning of the show. But nonetheless, we had a halftime show. 29-13, Seattle defeat the New England Patriots.
Yeah, I mean, look, this was a dominant game by Seattle. There's no way around it. Is this going to be remembered as one of the great Super Bowls? Probably not. But I will say these were two really great defenses, that's for sure. And I think sometimes in this modern fantasy football culture that we live in, people get too hung up on touchdowns and points and can't appreciate a game like this. I know I can. I know you can, Alex. Appreciate seeing what we saw because there was some star power on the defensive side of the ball on both sides. And these rosters had a lot of talent, and this Seahawks roster, because I want to start with them, of course, because they go home with the trophy here. I don't know if, nationally, GM John Schneider gets enough credit for what he's done there. This guy's been really, really impressive in Seattle for a long time now. And with this win, Alex, he actually becomes the first NFL GM to win 2 Super Bowls with the same franchise using entirely different rosters. So we've seen GMs win multiple Super Bowls, but usually there's some carryover. You see a couple guys that were on the first Super Bowl team that make it onto the next one. This is 2 completely different rosters. So pretty impressive stuff. And if you look at how this team was built, he made some nice moves in free agency, picked up Sam Darnold, obviously the big story, picking up a guy like Julian Love, some moves to kind of fill in some pieces. But primarily this team was built through the draft. And obviously we're going to be shifting gears here to the NFL draft in no time, but you look at this team, and this is absolutely the blueprint if you want to build a great roster. Is you got to crush the draft, not just those first couple rounds, but you have to crush the draft consistently to build your foundation, and then you kind of fill in the holes with some free agent moves like we've seen from the Seattle team. I mean, go back and look at those recent drafts that really were the pillars of this team right now. 2022, 2023, 2024, absolutely crushed those drafts, Alex, for John Schneider and the Seahawks.
Yeah. A lot of people talk about, this is Pete was there. Well, let's look what happened since Pete left. They get Sam Darnold. I don't think they drafted Walker, but then they get Cooper Kupp. They get Rashid Shaheed. They get Jackson Smith and Jigba. They get Byron Murphy. They get Ernest Jones. They get Nick Aaron. They get Devin Weatherspoon. They get DeMarcus Lawrence, and then so on from there. You just look at just those players that I named, and that is the staunch with rookies and veterans mixed in when I mentioned DeMarcus Lawrence. But Sam Darnold, they mix those guys together and they hit. And that's how you win. That's how you build a franchise. That's how you start to multiply your franchise. They started last year, they changed coaches, and then they get to this year, they go 14-3, and then they win the Super Bowl. I know we're talking about Seattle, but nonetheless, the New England Patriots, they've sort of done the same thing, probably with more rookies more than anything else, but they did the same exact thing. They added Drake Maye, they added Ramondre, they added Trayvon, they added Mac Hollins, they added Milton Williams, Robert Spillane, and you go 14-3, and you end up in the Super Bowl as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Stephon Diggs.
Right. Because you're right. It was a blend of kind of picking up some key free agents. New England coming off of a 4-win year the year prior, and they had a lot of cap space, and they went and used it to kind of fill in some of the holes on this roster. And for the most part, they hit on a lot of those guys, made a lot of nice moves, and then that combined with a lot of really good draft picks in recent years, none other than Christian Gonzalez, who, wow, I mean, I know in a losing effort, but what a game he had. He might be the best corner in the game right now. And then the other guy that might be in the conversation for best corners on the other side in that same draft class. If you remember, Alex, him and Devin Witherspoon were both the top two corners in this class. We liked both these guys. They both were first-round picks, and now look at where they are a couple years later, two of the elite young corners in the game right now. I mean, Witherspoon was incredible in this game. And I will correct you on one thing. Kenneth Walker was drafted by Seattle. I believe he was a second-round pick.
He was. Okay, I'm.
Yeah, so, but you're right about the Patriots. And look, I think what's getting lost here, and the Seahawks deserve a lot of credit, right? They had a great season. They were clearly the better team. They were clearly the best team in the NFL this year. They were the one seed out of the NFC, which was the better conference this year. They belonged where they are right now, which is hoisting that trophy. But I don't want to ignore the season the Patriots had. They were probably, truthfully, a year, maybe 2 years ahead of schedule with what they did this year. I mean, it's pretty impressive. And everyone's talking about how they had a light schedule and this and that. That's fine. But this team really played well, and they really came together. And I don't think they're going anywhere. I think they clearly have some things they need to fix on this roster. They have some upgrades they need to do. They're clearly not ready to play with the team on this level. But this is a team that is young. I believe they led the NFL in snap count by rookies. So a very young team with a lot to build on here. No shame in losing to the Seattle team. I think, unfortunately for us fans, I think the real Super Bowl was actually played in the NFC Championship game a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
I think those were the two best teams, kind of looking back here now. And they're the early co-favorites to win the Super Bowl next year. Looking at the Seahawks, dominant defensive effort. The Seahawks offense wasn't great in this game, Alex. This Patriots defense really kept them in this game all the way up until the fourth quarter. It was all field goals. They were keeping them out of the end zone. And in the fourth quarter, the dam kind of finally broke for New England, and that's when we saw Seattle kind of pull away. But Seahawks overall, I didn't think Sam Darnold was very impressive. We talked about our Super Bowl MVP odds on the preview episode going into this game, and I mentioned how I didn't think Sam Darnold was a good bet. I thought a guy like Kenneth Walker was a much better bet. I mentioned a couple other guys I thought were better bets. Kenneth Walker ends up getting great odds for all you guys that might have picked up that bet. That one hit. But Seahawks 4 for 16 on third down, 1 for 4 in the red zone. Not a very impressive effort, and they let this New England team hang around for a long time in this game, Alex, if not for a couple key plays here or there. If they could have gotten anything going on offense, they could have swung this and gotten back into this game.
Yeah, and I mean, the score at the end of the first half was 9-0, if I'm not mistaken. So it's 9-0. If they score, it's 9-7. It's that simple.
Right.
It's really that simple. When you're scoring 3, the Patriots defense did their job. They held them up to standard by saying, okay, you drove, you got down into the 20, and then we're not going to let you score anymore, and we're going to have you kick. We're going to just have you kick.
The feel of the game, I'm not going to lie, it was 9-0. It felt like they should have been up a lot more. If New England could have just had any big play go their way, they could have been right back in this game. It just, like I said, it just finally got away from them late. All the headlines are about this redemption story, and that's great. And don't get me wrong, it's a cool story, but let's look at the reality of this. This is still a guy that led the NFL in turnovers this year. He had 3 passes in the first quarter alone that probably should have been picked off. Who knows how this game plays out if any of those plays go New England's way. There was, 5? I think I counted 5 or 6 times at least in this game where Darnold escaped what would have been a huge sack. And I'll give him credit. He did a great job, evading the pass rush. But, man, there was a lot of times where it looked like New England was going to make a big play and get off the field, and Darnold somehow escapes. I also thought just the tackling overall from New England just wasn't very good. I mean, how many times in this game did it look like it should have been a 2-yard loss and it turns into a 6-yard gain because the guy misses a tackle on the outside, especially on those runs we saw from Kenneth Walker? I want to get your thoughts here on what we saw from the Patriots game plan. I actually think a big loser for this game is Josh McDaniels. Yeah. I thought he had a really bad night, Alex.
Right. So there's 2 things I want to say on Josh McDaniels. We can call it a bad game, but was it a bad game, or was it that Drake Maye wasn't doing what he normally what he wasn't finding the plays that were open? Now, I will say, watching on some of those third down plays, I said the routes are too long. You've got to go shorter than the first down marker, and then make a quick pass, and hopefully the receiver can make the first down. They make him miss a tackle, because one of the things that he wasn't doing was that he was allowing too much time for the defense to get to Drake Maye. Now I will say that, so he is a loser there, but a lot of it was, I'm not sure if Drake Maye was seeing everything, and I didn't get to look at the all-22 yet, but from what I saw, their routes were too long, and I felt that they should have shortened up the routes. They should have done a lot of what I saw from Clint Kubiak's standpoint. They shortened the routes. They ran the ball. Ramondre Stevenson only ran the ball 7 times. Travion Henderson only ran the ball 6 times. That is 13. That's 13 carries. Kenneth Walker ran it 27 times by himself. So it doesn't matter if they weren't getting the yards. The game was still within that clutch that you still should have been running the ball a lot more, where Drake Maye ended up having the most yards in 37, Ramondre with 23, and I believe Travion Henderson only had 19. Travion Henderson is a guy that you have to keep getting at least 10 to 12 runs, because one of those runs, he breaks one. So 6 runs is not enough for him to go forward in that game. So you know what? I go back on that. Yeah, I have to look at Josh McDaniels. It is more Josh McDaniels' fault, just based upon what I thought.
And there's multiple things here. I didn't think their game plan was very good. Now, no, don't get me wrong. I don't want to make this sound like Seattle's defense wasn't lights out.
Right.
They were, and I know it's hard to call a game when you're going up against a defense like this. However, I didn't think the play calling was very good at all from them. And the lack of adjustments once they started getting behind the sticks was even more alarming. Your left side, the 2 rookies are getting beat like a drum. And we talked about this going into the game. Was the first thing we talked about in the preview episode, Alex, was the Patriots O-line versus that D-line. That had to be the biggest mismatch. Everyone talked about it going into this game. That was what everyone was circling here, and why Seattle was the big favorite, because that was the mismatch. So if we know it, they know it. And I don't remember much 12 personnel at all. Right. I don't remember 21 personnel at all. If you bring in 12 personnel, now you've got some tight ends to help those tackles. 21 personnel, you could have had 2 backs in the backfield for some pass protection. They didn't go to that at all in this game. There was only a couple times. I only counted a handful of times that they brought in the 6th offensive lineman. I expected to see that a lot more in this game. They didn't. I talked about it in the preview, Alex. I expected a lot of screen plays to try to offset that aggressive pass rush. Nope. I expected Drake Maye to be much more of a threat running the ball. Nope. I expected them to move the pocket and kind of get him away from the rush, utilize Maye's legs, not just as a runner, but just getting him on the move, right? Getting him on some rollouts, on some bootlegs, some things where you can get him moving and kind of get him away. Nope, didn't see that either. To your point, Alex, way too much straight drop back passing.
Yeah.
Not enough run game, not enough balance. I saw very few chip blocks from the backs. I mean, help this young guy out. He's getting killed back there. And I just didn't see the adjustments at all. I understand that you come in with a game plan. For one, I didn't think it was a good game plan from the get-go, but then they just stuck with it. And it didn't make sense to me. Help this guy out. Give him some outs, right? Give him, to your point, Alex, where was the quick hitters? Where were the hot routes? Where were the quick hitting slant plays that you could kind of get the ball out of his hands quick to evade the rush? There was none of that, and they never adjusted to what Seattle was doing in this game.
Yeah, and the other thing is, you talk about 12 personnel or 21 personnel. Where was Austin Hooper in this game? Like, I didn't see. Right. Well, not just Austin Hooper. Where were Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper? Like, I understand that there weren't a lot of catches during the game. I mean, the wide receivers caught their passes, but they looked like tight ends. Nobody was down the field, anything like that, and that is fine, with the exception of Mac Hollins. But that was fine. But where were they're taking away Stephon Diggs. They're not letting us get, even when we do catch the ball, they're tackling us right away. You know what? Let's go to the tight ends. Let's double down with two tight ends set, maybe a 2 running back, 1 wide receiver, or 2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 1 running back, whatever setup that you want to go with. Let's go with one of those setups and see if we can move the ball to get down the field, as opposed to going 3 and out every single time. I mean, One of those, if I believe it was after the half, New England got the ball back. They had the ball for 12 seconds and the play was over. That was it. It was 12 seconds and they gave the ball right back to New England. No, I'm sorry, right back to Seattle.
I also found out today, listening on NFL radio, apparently he got an injection, a pain-killing injection in his shoulder right before the game, which is very interesting. He was not on the injury report, he was on the injury report, but he was a full participant in practice on Friday. Which is
who was this?
Drake Maye, because you know how he was dealing with the shoulder injury after the championship game, and there was some talk about that going into this game about the soreness in his throwing shoulder. I come to find out today that he got a pain-killing shot in that throwing shoulder before the game, which I think is very interesting because that tells you he was clearly dealing with some real pain going into this game, and New England was trying to downplay it. And I know they're not trying to use that as an excuse or whatever, but there were actually a handful of times in this game where May had guys open and he was way off. And I can't help but wonder if that affected his ability to throw accurately in this game. I know he was a little bit rattled, but they had some plays. There was some plays to be made that they didn't make that, let's face it, this guy led the league in completion percentage. I think it's safe to say he's a pretty accurate quarterback, and he missed badly on a couple throws in this game that I was a little bit shocking to me. I will go back to this, though. I thought Seattle's defensive game plan overall, I think, just had New England completely lost. And like I mentioned, the lack of adjustments, but I will give Seattle some credit here in the sense that they came out and did some things that they don't normally do, and it totally caught New England off guard. For instance, Seattle didn't blitz much this season.
Yep.
They're a team that, they get a lot of pressure with their front four, and then they typically drop guys into coverage. That's kind of their MO. Macdonald was dialing up the blitz early and often in this game, which is something he doesn't do much of. They blitzed, Alex, at one point early in this game. They blitzed on 6 consecutive downs. That is unheard of. That's unheard of. That is unheard of. And that, to me, that's great coaching because that's a coach that understood his tendencies. He knew that New England was going to see how little they blitzed, and he went against what he normally does to throw them off guard, and it totally worked. The other thing I saw in this game, Alex, Seattle plays a lot of 4-man fronts. They came out in a lot of 5-man fronts in this game, and I think that really confused New England too because they were expecting that base 4, and they got a lot of 5-man fronts that really threw off their game plan. I just think the combination of what Seattle did, some left hooks that they didn't see coming, and they just were never able to get adjusted to the game plan or the flow of this game.
Yeah, I'm taking a look, and what I'm looking at right now, I'm looking at PFF. I'm looking at Devin Witherspoon. Devin Witherspoon, in terms of pressures, he had the most pressures this game. He had the most sacks this game. He had the most QB hits this game as well. So Devin Witherspoon, whether you want to look at his lineup, and if you didn't watch the game, you didn't see a lot of what he was doing. That's not to take away from anybody else on that Seattle defense, but he was blitzing all over the place. Like every single time you look, it was him in the back.
Yeah, I heard an interesting interview with him after the Super Bowl. They asked him about how he was utilized in this game, and a lot on the edge and as a blitzer, which is something they didn't do a lot of in the regular season. He said when they went back and watched the tape, their coaching staff had noticed that they were giving some tells with their pass sets pre-snap. And the Seattle coaching staff alerted them to that if you see these sets, we're going to bring pressure. And it worked perfectly. And a lot of it comes back to Will Campbell, unfortunately. And look, I hate to beat up on this guy, but look, we've got to face the facts here, Alex. I think it's safe to say Will Campbell is not a left tackle in this league. I'm sorry, he's not. And I'm not, I know it's easy to pick on a guy after he has a bad game in a big moment. And I know these games get magnified because of how big this game was, but he gave up 14 pressures in this game, Alex. 14 pressures. He got, and look, that's just to put that in perspective. That's the most pressures any offensive lineman in the NFL gave up in any single game this season.
Yeah, by far. Yeah,
I mean, absolutely got destroyed. And here's the thing, and once again, I know it gets magnified in the Super Bowl, but this guy got destroyed all throughout the playoffs. He struggled. He just wasn't very good throughout the season. He wasn't good in the regular season. He collapsed in the playoffs versus some of these really good defenses. He's not strong enough. He's got short arms, which we talked about during the combine. defenders, and people talk about, what is the short arm thing? What is that? When you've got short arms at tackle, defenders can get into your pads. And we see it way too much with Campbell. Guys get into his pads and they drive him into the backfield. His feet are too slow. He's not athletic enough. It's just alarming how bad he played this year. I will be absolutely shocked, Alex, if he is the starting tackle next year. And this is a guy who was the 4th overall pick. So let's take a quick trip back to last April. The Jets took Armand Mimbu at pick 7. Mm-hmm. He was great as a rookie. And then Kelvin Banks was the Saints pick at number 9. Also, very good rookie year. This one stings. This one really stings because as good as this New England team is, as good as they are and all the pieces they've added, that draft pick is going to haunt them because now you've got a guy that clearly isn't good enough at a premier position where you drafted him, and there were guys available that you could have taken, so that one's going to sting.
Yeah, and again, just looking at his PFF grade, I mean, he has 2 games where he's under 60. He's got a couple games where he has 2 games where he's under 60. In the playoffs against Houston, Denver, and Seattle, he's 45.8, 50.6, 38.2. Pass blocking, he's 16.5, 59.7, and 32.9 against Seattle. So he wasn't good in the pass game whatsoever. Now, that can also be a mixture of what he and Wilson did, both of those guys being rookies on that left side, which I can understand saying, hey, we're going to take I'm sorry, I forgot the gentleman's name, from the right guard and put him at left guard and kind of mix those up a little bit so they can perhaps fix some of the confusion that was going on there. But they left those 2 guys on the island by themselves.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And like I said, we're picking on this guy. We're picking on the left side, and rightfully so because they had a bad showing, but I don't think the coaching staff did much to help him. I really don't. And especially once they started getting beat repeatedly early in that game, there should be red flags going off as a coach saying, okay, look, we got to change some things up. We got to bring in some different personnel. We've got to run some different plays here. I just didn't see it from that New England team. Now, we talked about some prop bets, some MVP picks and all that during the preview. Look, I got to take a victory lap, Alex. Cooper Kupp, my favorite prop bet, was over 3.5 receptions. That hit before halftime. And here's the thing about Cooper Kupp. I said that he's going to be a guy they're going to go to because I thought Christian Gonzalez is going to slow down.
We
Jackson Smith and Jigba. Now, he was even better than I thought. My goodness, he was lights out. But Cooper Kupp quietly had a really nice game. It's not going to show up on the stat sheet, but he was lights out as a run blocker on the outside. He sprung a lot of those outside runs that Kenneth Walker had. He was big time. And like I said, not in the fantasy stat way, not in the, didn't have huge numbers, but he made some big catches and some huge blocks in this game.
Not to not mention Kenneth Walker, he had a lot of those runs. They ran the ball. They consistently ran the ball. And when it was time for him to pop, he popped when he broke a few tackles, broke outside, got outside, was able to get up the field, and then he caught a few passes. I think it was only 2 for 27 or 2 for 26. I'm not sure. So he ended up with like about 158, 160 yards on 29 touches.
Yeah, no, he was really the only consistent player they had on the offensive side of the ball for sure. And I think he's one of the only Super Bowl MVPs not to score a touchdown, which was kind of interesting. But that's just the kind of game it was. And when you're in a game like this, I also mentioned this in the preview, and it totally came to fruition, was I mentioned how turnovers and special teams would play a role in this game, and they absolutely did. The turnovers late in this game were huge. That's when Seattle really pulled away. But the special teams, I don't know if people are talking about enough, because you look at what Seattle did in this game. They didn't beat themselves. They only allowed 1 sack. They had no turnovers in this game. Their field goal kicker didn't miss a single kick. And their punter pinned the Patriots at the 6-yard line, the 4-yard line, the 2-yard line. I mean, the Patriots were consistently starting in deep field position. And the Seahawks won that battle on the special team side of this game too.
Yeah, and that was something that you had to look at as well. I mean, Michael Dixon for them had 7 punts. Yeah, 7 punts, and then Bryce Baringer had 8 punts for the Patriots. Bryce Baringer had 4 inside the 20 for the Patriots, and Michael Dixon had 3. So they basically evened each other up. And now, of course, what the Seahawks did to the Patriots, and then with the Patriots not being able to move the ball, was a bigger impact because they were never able to get out of some of those. But there was a lot of punting in this game. I think both punters, if I'm not mistaken, were both over 350 yards punting.
Yeah, it was nice to see a game where guys aren't going for it on fourth down, play the field position battles, kind of a throwback football game for a lot of people. And I know a lot of the new school fantasy football guys didn't love this type of game, but I appreciated the chess match that we saw on Sunday. Any final thoughts on this game, Alex, before we put a bow on the Super Bowl?
You know what? Let's just have a little bit of fun and talk about the halftime show. Now, listen, I understood what the halftime show was. There was nothing in English except for Lady Gaga, but I didn't understand anything. The beats were great. The beats I understood, but I didn't understand anything until he got to the end. So I'm wondering, and I guess we'll have to take a look at some point to see what the halftime show ranked with everybody looking at the halftime show.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I wasn't familiar with his work. It's not somebody that I listen to. I don't speak Spanish, so I didn't know what he was saying. I didn't understand the lyrics, obviously. I know he's a big name in the music industry. I know you have a music background, Alex, of course, with your time working in music and at multiple major record labels and with a lot of different artists. I know he is a big draw, and I know that he was a big name for this event. I probably didn't enjoy it as much as I should because, like I said, it's just not my cup of tea. I don't.
Right.
I don't listen to, Spanish music, but I think it was pretty obvious what it meant to the NFL as far as being able to grab a demographic that they normally wouldn't have had for this game. Now, I'm not saying Spanish speakers don't watch football.
Absolutely.
Of course they do, but I think it's safe to say that this had a lot more to do with the NFL trying to pull in a demographic of people that normally might not watch this game.
Right.
And trying to get them to tune in, which from that standpoint was probably a wild success.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you got that with the build up to what's happening with the World Cup going to be played in LA, even though it was in San Francisco, but still going to be played in California. And then California in itself being right there next to Mexico. You had a lot of people. There were people, Jessica Alba, Cardi B, a couple other people were dancing there at the bottom. So, I think larger scale standpoint, I think the show was great. I'm going to, omit myself and how I felt about it. I'm just talking about the show overall. I thought the show was a great show and that it will do some things that we should eventually see in the NFL, especially with how they're branching out the game and they're going into foreign territories.
Yeah, I've already heard next year they're going to have even more international games. There's going to be a game again in Mexico City next season. We haven't had a Mexico City game for a couple of years, so they're bringing a game back there. I believe there's going to be another game in Brazil, and then, of course, multiple games over in Europe as well, like they've been doing for several years. But they keep expanding it. And the number of international games gets bigger and bigger. This is clearly an audience that the NFL has targeted now for several years, and I think this was part of that strategy, right? Like I talked about, not just pulling in the Spanish speakers here in the States, but a lot of the international audience as well tuning into this, probably because of that halftime show. So, hats off to them. It's a great marketing strategy, of course. Even if it's not necessarily my music, it was a great move by them, I'm sure. And the last thing I'll say on it before we move on to this NFL draft stuff, Alex, and put a bow on this. Did you hear this story about the people in the halftime show actually got married? That wasn't a stunt.
Yes, that wasn't a stunt. And that wasn't
pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought it was real because I was like, wait, this doesn't make any sense that they have a lot. And it wasn't like it was part of the show a few times. And that's what made me think it would, because I meant to try and follow up on it, but then we got back to the game, so I completely forgot. But watching what they were doing, I said, wait a minute, they did something in the beginning, then they did something again when they got to the top of the stage. I was like, I think that's a real marriage. And I didn't recognize the two people or anything like that. But I was like, I think this is for real. I don't think this is, it's part of the show. I don't think it's just for show. I think this is actually a real marriage, but I did see that.
So I wasn't thinking that it was real at all. I mean, obviously, I don't know what the words are in the music, so I had no idea if the lyrics were talking about marriage and that was just part of the theatrical part of it. I didn't know what to make of it, to be honest, but I did notice early before the actual ceremony part, I remember him having the wedding ring and then handing it to him, and then they proposed. I think that was the same couple. I don't really know, but then I don't know, to be honest. But I did hear that
it was real, yeah.
I heard that the whole thing was real, and that apparently this couple invited him to their wedding, and so in return, he did this for them, which is really cool. I mean, really, really cool. The only thing bad for him is now he's going to have 10 million people asking for him to go to their wedding. However, it's a very, very classy move by Bad Bunny regardless. So, all right, man, let's put a bow on it here. Incredible NFL season, incredible Super Bowl, but it's officially draft season again. Quick shout out to our friends at props.cash, the best player prop research tool in the game. Props.cash lets you scan thousands of props across sports books to quickly spot the highest value opportunities. You get real-time injury and lineup intel, advanced filters to find exactly what you're looking for, and even correlated player props so you can see what tends to hit when a player goes over their line. They cover NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, college football, college basketball, and the WNBA. It's legit next level prep. If you're serious about betting smarter, go to props.cash and use code PGF25 for 25% off your first month. That's code PGF25 for 25% off your first month at props.cash. The official ticketing app of Pint Glass Football is now SeatGeek. I can't recommend them enough, guys. I've been using SeatGeek for years. You want to go to a game this season? SeatGeek is here to take the confusion out of buying tickets, making sure you get the best seats at the best prices. With SeatGeek, you'll never have to worry about overpaying for tickets again. How? They put a 0 to 10 score on each ticket, so you know you're getting a good deal. But here's the real game changer. You can get $20 off your first ticket purchase with the code PGFPOD. That's right, $20 off with code PGFPOD. This season, make every game day epic with SeatGeek. Download the SeatGeek app and remember to enter the code PGFPOD to grab your $20 discount. And we've got the NFL Mock Draft 1.0 from yours truly. Like I said, guys, if you haven't already, go back. We did picks 1 through 12. We're going to continue with the rest of the first round picks, and Alex can tell me how much he hates these picks and how they make no sense at all. We ended on pick 12 with the Cowboys, so we're going to move on to pick number 13, LA Rams via the Atlanta Falcons with that trade. They're going to take Mekhi Lemon, the wide receiver out of USC. Alex, we're going to have a lot of time to talk about these players as we get further down the draft process, but I'll say this. I love this guy's game, man. Physical, playmaker, wide receiver, yards after the catch monster, a guy who can take a 5-yard catch, turn it into a 12, 15-yard play, big-time football IQ. I just think he is a great fit, especially for the Rams. You've got Puka, but Devontae Adams getting a little older. They could definitely add some more juice in the passing game, and I think he's a great fit and a guy that I really like. Now, look, not the biggest wide receiver, but I'll say this. If you've watched his tape, he plays much bigger than his stature. He is a guy that will high point the football. He will climb the ladder and go get it. So I really like Mekhi Lemon, and I think he'd be a great fit for the Rams at 13.
I think it would be a good fit. But I think the real thing here is they need to really address cornerback. Now, I know there's not a lot of cornerbacks based upon how you ran, 1.0, but I think they're going to find a defensive back. I'll just say a defensive back. They're going to define a defensive back somewhere along the line to go after here. They're going to move out. But more importantly, not the Rams, but Atlanta. And just a real quick sidebar. What happened with James Pierce being arrested, everything going on with Rakia Jackson from the WNBA and her trying to get away and him running and hitting a car, having an accident with a car and the police chasing him? Atlanta's got a lot of questions to answer from the guy that led them in sacks this year, a guy we saw that they traded back into the first round for, that they gave up to the Rams, which is how the Rams got this pick. But the Rams getting this pick and then them trading back up to get James Pierce And what is the James Pierce story now going forward?
Yeah, it's a great point because, like I mentioned, like you said, they acquired this pick from Atlanta with that James Pierce trade, and boy, that's some pretty bad headlines coming out for this rookie. And I'll say this: look, we both liked James Pierce as a player when we did our draft evaluations last year. Thought he was a guy who clearly had a lot of talent. However, he was a guy that was sliding on draft boards for a reason. And we talked about it and we've mentioned it multiple times on this show. This is why guys with off the field red flags will fall down draft boards more often than not. Because with guys like this, you just don't always know if it's going to carry over in the NFL. Are they going to get it together or are they going to be a problem? And now Atlanta has a major problem with this guy going forward. And I love talented players, but give me a locker room guy over a guy who has off-field issues every time. Let's move on here. Pick number 14. Got the Baltimore Ravens. I'm going to struggle with this name. And before the draft season is over, I'm going to try to get this right. But this is the offensive guard out of Penn State. Loaney is his last name, I believe. Ola Viaga. I'm sure I butchered that, and I apologize. Loaney out of Penn State. A lot of people have him as the number one guard in this class. I think he's certainly in the discussion. I'll have my rankings coming out a little bit later. I'll let you know where I've got him. But for this mock, I think he's a guy that could potentially fit here because the Ravens have a serious issue at the guard position. And this would be a guy you could plug and play as a starter here. And at 14, you're getting maybe the best guard in this class at a position of need. So I think it fits for them. This is a big, powerful athlete, quick hands, really versatile as far as being able to play right or left guard, a guy that can really anchor, pass protect. I think he's a guy that has a lot of potential because he's a consistent performer at Penn State. You look at his tape, very consistent game to game. He's good in the run game. He's good in pass protection. Just a very solid pick for the Ravens here at guard.
Yeah, you get no argument from me here. I mean, if you watch what they had with Afeni and everything going on, they need to get a guard. Even though a lot of people are going to be due some dues, I think the center the center is due a new deal, and I think the other tackles do a new deal too. But they can stay planted right here with him.
Pick number 15. Tampa Bay Buccaneers take a guy who was a breakout player this year, a guy that we talked about in the preseason, Alex, Cassius Howell, the edge out of Texas A&M, a guy that we thought could have a breakout year, and he did, man. And this is a guy that I know he has something that I know you love, and that is a 100-mile-per-hour motor. He never turns it off. I love the effort. I love the energy. 27 career sacks, so he's productive. 35 and a half tackles for a loss, a guy who gets in the backfield and is a disruptor because he's explosive off the edge. He is violent, nasty. I mean, tough dude, just screams Tampa Bay Buccaneers, screams Todd Bowles, his kind of guy. I think he fits the defensive scheme. So Cassius Howell at 15 to the Bucs.
Yeah, once again, no pushback from me at all here on 1.0. I'm with you there.
All right, let's go to the New York Jets. Now, they've got this pick via that trade with Indy, I believe it was part of the Sauce Gardner trade.
Sauce Gardner trade.
And look, I think the Jets go with Carnell Tate. Now, the wide receiver out of Ohio State. This is a guy that a lot of people think could be the number one wide receiver off the board. Obviously, in my mock, I don't have him there, but I could understand if he wasn't available at this point. It's really going to be, choose your flavor when it comes to wide receiver in this draft, because there's a group of guys that are all kind of viewed in a similar grade range. But a lot of people do have Carnell Tate as the number one wide receiver. Really good player, really fast, explosive, quick first step. I think he's a guy with a really high ceiling, but a very high floor. I think he comes in as a polished player, a player who runs really clean routes, reliable hands. He's good in contested catch situations. He can play in the slot. He can play outside. They moved him around a lot at Ohio State. I just think this is a really great value pick. It's a good wide receiver class. If Carnell Tate's on the board this late, I think the Jets would run to the podium to make this pick because they've got to find someone who can be a playmaker opposite of Garrett Wilson.
Once again, no pushback. This is the third one in a row. No pushback from me. I agree with this pick.
Now, at 17, Detroit Lions. I have them taking Caleb Lomu, the offensive tackle out of Utah. Now, this is the other offensive tackle out of Utah. Utah had one of the best offensive lines in college football last year. They've got two guys that I think could both go in the first round, and I think this is a fit for the Lions because this is a guy who can protect the quarterback. He's really, really durable. I mean, 800 snaps at left tackle last season. So you want to talk about a guy who fits into the culture of what the Lions are. The Lions want to be a dominant offensive team or offensive line, a physical, tough team. And as great as that O-line was a couple years ago, we've seen it take a little bit of a dip with some of the players they've lost up front. So I think it's time to get some youth infused back into this offensive line. I think he's also a guy who probably hasn't played his best football. There's some developmental upside for a guy like this. I think he's also a guy that if he doesn't work at offensive tackle, he's absolutely a home run pick at guard. So I think it kind of fits either way. You kind of cross your fingers and hope he can play tackle. If not, I think he fits easily inside. Good run blocker, very consistent pass blocker. I think this is a home run hit for the Lions here at 17.
4 in a row, no pushback from me.
All right. So this is a player that really hit my radar during the Senior Bowl. At number 18, the Minnesota Vikings take Emmanuel McNeill-Warren, the safety out of Toledo. I think they're going to have to start looking for a replacement for Harrison Smith.
Yeah.
Very good player. Obviously, getting towards the end of his career. They need some help on the back end of that defense. This is a guy who's explosive. He can cover. He's good in run support. Very smart player. Very instinctive. He has good read and react quickness. Played both safeties in college. Was able to move around the field. Kind of a little bit of a chess piece type safety. So I think this makes a lot of sense for them. And like I said, a guy who I didn't see play much, but he's got on my radar, Alex, here in the draft process because he really showed out during the Senior Bowl, and I'm going to be excited to see what he does at the Combine.
Yeah, once again, no pushback from me. I believe that they're going to have to, at some point, they're going to have to look at, I know they kind of threw one away with Lewis signing. They fired their previous GM. Now they have a new GM. So, yeah, they're going to have to look at replacing Harrison Smith.
I've been very critical of the Vikings draft classes the last couple of years. I think it's very interesting. They fired their GM. Two things happened, right? For one, Sam Darnold goes on to make a Super Bowl run and then obviously just won the Super Bowl, but made a Super Bowl run when Minnesota decided to move off of him as far as re-signing him. Some of that obviously is going to fall back on the GM. And that doesn't look good when you move a guy out of the building for a young guy that hasn't played well, and then the guy you pushed out of the building goes on to win the Super Bowl. That doesn't look good. So we have that. And then we've got the draft right around the corner here. And let's face it, with his draft record, I wouldn't want him anywhere near my draft class either. So, right. It was probably one of those things where like, look, we got to move on before we get any further in the process here because we need to find out who we like in this class. So very interesting story for Minnesota going in a new direction there at the GM. 19, Carolina Panthers take Jordan Tyson, wide receiver out of Arizona State. Now, I mentioned Mekhi Lemon, I've mentioned Carnell Tate, and I've mentioned Jordan Tyson now. These are kind of the big three as far as the wide receivers in this class. There's some really good players that are going to go after them, but these are kind of the three guys that everyone sees as the top three picks as far as receiver. I think any order could be possible. I think any one of these guys could be the first receiver, second or third. I think you can kind of shuffle them around. But I think Jordan Tyson makes a lot of sense because you pair up a big receiver with another big receiver in Teteroa McMillan. Jalen Coker was another receiver, a young receiver they have that looked really good this year. Now you've got a trio of pass catchers for your young quarterback. And the reason that I think Jordan Tyson really works in Carolina, and I think it's also the reason Teteroa McMillan worked so well, you've got a small quarterback. And I think the Carolina Panthers thinking was, let's get him some big targets, right? Let's make it easier on a small quarterback by giving him some big targets to throw to. Jordan Tyson is a big physical wide receiver, a guy who's got really nice route running, very reliable hands. I think he's got the ability to be a plug-and-play starter for this wide receiver group opposite of McMillan on the outside. The only real red flag for him is he has had some injury issues. And there's a lot of people that will tell you he might actually be the most talented wide receiver in this class. But I think the injury issues are a real concern. And that's why I've got him sliding a little bit on my draft board here. Pick number 20, Dallas Cowboys here. They've got this pick via the Green Bay Packers, part of that Micah Parsons trade that we saw earlier in the year. I think they're going to go with a guy like Keldrick Falk, the edge rusher out of Auburn. Now, he's going to be an interesting guy to talk about later in the process, Alex, because there's some real question marks about him, but he's a big-time athlete with a lot of traits that you're looking for, 6'6", almost 290 pounds. The question is, can he develop into an elite pass rusher? But he's a guy that I think there's a lot of potential here for him, and they still need to address this defense. I think that much is obvious.
Yeah, I'll say this really quick. I'm not sure about that one either. I think because I think they're going to bring Jadeveon Clowney back. I think they're going to maybe try and go for a line. Well, if there's a linebacker there or a cornerback. I know they drafted Caleb Downs, the safety, but I think they might try and go for a cornerback. Just the way that however the draft.
21 Pittsburgh Steelers, Denzel Boston, the wide receiver out of Washington. He's kind of the first player just outside of tier 1 when it comes to these wide receivers, but people might be sleeping on this guy a little bit. Big physical receiver, outside receiver, kind of prototypical X receiver. Pair him up with a guy like DK Metcalf. Now you've got two big physical receivers on the outside. He's a guy who's really good in the 50-50 contested catches. You know, like I said, just a physical, fast player. I think he's a very clean route runner. I think he has the potential to be a plug-and-play starter for a team that desperately needs one on the outside.
Yeah, I can see this one. I don't have a problem here. The Steelers had a lot of issues with the passing game, so I can see this happening.
At number 22, LA Chargers, I have them taking Lee Hunter, defensive tackle out of Texas Tech. Size, quickness, just a big pass rushing type of interior defensive lineman, can anchor in the run game. And I think this is a move that I think is a little bit of an insurance because you've got some free agent departures that are going to be leaving that team on the inside. So I think he's a guy you can kind of bring in, plug that hole up front. And we know Harbaugh loves to build in the trenches, and I think they've got a good one here with Lee Hunter.
Yeah, I can see Lee Hunter, but they're also going to lose Khalil Mack, and they don't have any big-time pass rushers, and we'll have to see if they resign the linebacker they got from the Ravens. So they're missing a lot. They're going to be missing a lot on defense here.
Number 23, Philadelphia Eagles take Avion Terrell, the cornerback out of Clemson. This is A.J. Terrell's younger brother here. A.J. Terrell, obviously, corner for the Atlanta Falcons. And look, his younger brother looks like he could be a good one. When you talk about a guy you can bring in now, and he can play on the outside opposite of Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean is in the nickel. Now you've got a trio of young corners that are versatile, and are playmakers. I think this would be a fantastic move to round out a young secondary for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go there again because they went twice within the last year. So I think they need because I don't think they're going to keep Jordan. I don't believe they'll be able to keep Jordan Davis. So I would opt in either look at somebody on the defensive line, whether it be the edge or defensive tackle.
At 24, Cleveland Browns. This was a trade with Jacksonville from last year. I believe part of the Mason Graham trade that we saw, where they landed Mason Graham and the Jaguars took Travis Hunter. I believe it was part of that trade. I have them taking Caden Proctor, the big offensive tackle out of Alabama. I mean, this guy is huge, 6'5", 300+, a guy who can anchor. I think there's still a lot of developing for him. That's why I've got him a little further down in the draft. But he's a guy who's shown he can protect the quarterback. I think he might move into guard if he can't quite cut it at tackle. But there's a lot of traits. There's a lot of talent here to work with.
Yeah, no pushback from me here. I definitely believe that the Browns need to focus on the offense. They got the defense they have under control.
At 25, I've got the Chicago Bears taking safety Dylan Thieneman out of Oregon. Versatile safety. A chess piece safety for the Ducks. He played some slot nickel, can play in that big nickel, played strong safety, free safety. I mean, the Ducks really moved him around a lot, and he excelled really anywhere he lined up. Really high football IQ, can read and diagnose offenses quickly, quick read and react. They're going to have to address safety because they've got some expiring contracts on the back end. So I think that's a position that maybe they fill a hole here with a draft pick.
No, you get no argument from me there.
At 26, Buffalo Bills, I have them taking C.J. Allen, the linebacker out of Georgia. Now, I'm going to circle his name real quick because I forgot when you mentioned linebacker, he could be maybe the guy that you talked about. Who was the Cowboys? Yeah, that could be a spot where with him still on the board, I don't know if he'd go that high, but maybe if they value that position enough, that could be a guy that maybe isn't available here. But in this mock, I have him falling to the Bills, really strong against the run, can cover. Another guy, high football IQ. We know Georgia runs a very complex defense. So a lot of the guys, especially on the back end of that defense, very smart players. And you've got Milano, Shaq Thompson. There's going to be some free agent losses on the back end of this defense. So he's a guy that I think you can be a plug-and-play guy to replace at least one of those guys.
I think Buffalo has a lot of things to look at. They got to look at wide receiver, they got to look at offensive line, and they have to look at linebackers. So whichever one they go with, just take the best one available.
Number 27, 49ers. I have them taking Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end out of Oregon. This is a guy who can play some H-back. He's a flex tight end, kind of your new age flex style tight end. A little bit undersized, but man, is this guy incredibly athletic. This is one of the most athletic tight ends to come out of the draft probably since Kyle Pitts. I mean, off the charts athleticism, and I can't wait to see the show that he's going to put on at the Combine because, quite frankly, Alex, if he does what I think he'll do at the Combine, he's a guy to watch for that could climb draft boards. So he might not even be available at pick 27 after what we see him do there. I mean, very, very fast player. And here's the thing, even though he's not your big typical inline blocker, he's a reliable blocker. He's a very willing and capable blocker. So not just a big play threat as a receiver, but a guy that you can move around.
Yeah, I can see that happening. Obviously, with the injury to George Kittle, they're going to be looking for, and then we don't even know about Brandon Ayuk. They're going to be looking for another guy to bring in there, so I can see that happening.
At number 28, Houston Texans, I have them taking Monroe Freeling, offensive tackle out of Georgia. This is a guy who's been kind of climbing draft boards recently. He's a young prospect, definitely has not hit his ceiling. A lot of developmental upside, though. He's got all the traits, the size, the length, the quick feet, the things that you look for when you're looking for a tackle in the NFL. I think you pair him up on the other side with Aramonte Irsay. Now you've got two long-term answers potentially at the tackle position for CJ Stroud and try to get him some more protection next year.
No argument from me there. The Texans need offensive line, period, point blank in the discussion.
Absolutely. At pick 29, I've got the Rams going in a similar direction here, taking Blake Miller, the offensive tackle out of Clemson. This guy has a lot of experience, played a lot of ball in the ACC. He's competitive. He's tough, just has a lot of starts under his belt, 54 college starts. So you're talking about a guy who's really polished and ready to play. And for a Rams team that is still in this Super Bowl window, I think they're looking for plug-and-play starters over developmental guys right now.
Yeah, they'll be looking for another guy there unless they can perhaps find somebody in the defense, but I'm not mad at that pick at all.
Pick number 30, Denver Broncos. I have them taking defensive tackle Peter Woods out of Clemson. Man, this was a guy who kind of disappointed this year considering the expectations we had for him coming into the season, but the tape still has a lot to like. Quick first step. He's a guy who can push the pocket. He's a versatile defensive tackle, can play the run, can push the pocket, can get pressure on the quarterback. He's a guy who can anchor against the run. I like this pick for the Broncos because this is just a guy who I think comes in on another team that's looking to make the next step, right? A team that was very close, knocking on the door of a Super Bowl appearance. They're looking for guys that can be impact players early, and I think Peter Woods could be.
If they don't get him, they better get a wide receiver.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think they'll address it either way at some point in this draft. At pick 31, New England Patriots, I have them taking Akeem Mesidor, the edge defender out of Miami. Obviously, the guy who played opposite of Ruben Bain, explosive, really athletic, big-time production. Not sure he's played his best football yet as well. So I think there's definitely some developmental upside with this guy. And we saw what him and Bain did in that national title game. That kind of resonates, right? Like You look at the run they had, that Miami team making it all the way to title. He was a big part of it, a consistent disruptor. So I think he's a guy that the Patriots could add some more juice to that D-line with.
Yeah, and I can see that. I can see that as well. So I have no pushback there.
And then number 32, the Super Bowl champs, the Seattle Seahawks. I have them taking Brandon Sissy, the cornerback out of South Carolina. We've talked about South Carolina. These guys are just producing NFL talent, even though it doesn't show up in the win-loss column for them. And look, this is a team that just took Nick Amanawari out of South Carolina, the safety who already looks like one of the best defensive players in the NFL. I think they go back to South Carolina here with another corner, add some more depth to that secondary. Fast, can play inside, can play outside. And, I think there's going to be maybe a free agent void here. Woolen, I think, could be moving on. So, maybe you fill that hole with him. I just think there's a lot of upside for him. And a guy who I think could be a long-term starter opposite of Devin Witherspoon.
Yeah, I can say that as well, because I believe with them losing Tariq Woolen, they're going to need another guy to come in there, because they put Devin Witherspoon all over the place, mainly in the slot. So you're going to need a guy on the outside. So I can see that as well.
All right, guys, that is going to do it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it, PGF Nation. Do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We've got more NFL draft coverage coming. Probably another mock draft, player rankings, big board, you name it. It's going to be a lot of fun, so stick with us. Once again, I'm Brad Fowler. He's Alex Higdon. This is Pint Glass Football, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Pint Glass Football Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at PGF Podcast.